The doctor looked at my test results, then quietly asked the nurse to repeat every sample from the beginning, and the sudden silence inside that hospital room made my heart pound harder than it ever had before. I had walked into that cancer center hoping I might save my 16-year-old son, but the expression on the doctor's face told me something far bigger than illness had just been uncovered. My name is Daniel Brooks, and I have spent the last 4 years living with a broken heart that never seemed to heal, because I lost my family long before I ever lost hope. People in my town believed I was a man who abandoned his children, but the truth had been buried beneath years of lies that only one person benefited from protecting. Before I tell you what happened inside that hospital, you need to understand why I would gladly risk everything for a boy who refused to answer my calls. No matter what anyone believed, I had never stopped loving my sons, and there was never a single day when I wished they belonged to someone else. 17 years earlier, I owned a small repair garage outside Nashville where life moved slowly and everyone knew each other by name. And one rainy afternoon, a young woman named Victoria pulled into my lot with smoke pouring from beneath her hood. She looked exhausted before she even stepped out of the car. And after hearing the repair estimate, she quietly sat in the waiting area and cried as though her entire world had finally become too heavy to carry. While fixing her car, I learned she was expecting twin boys, and the man responsible had disappeared the moment he discovered she was pregnant, leaving her with unpaid bills, endless fear, and a future she could barely imagine surviving. I did not see someone carrying another man's children, because all I saw was a frightened woman trying to protect two innocent babies who had done nothing wrong. Over the next several weeks, she visited the garage often, sometimes bringing homemade cookies just to thank me for helping when she had almost nothing left. And our conversation slowly became the brightest part of every day. Without realizing it, we stopped talking like strangers and started leaning on each other, finding comfort in simple moments that neither of us expected would change our lives forever. I knew from the beginning those boys would never share my blood, yet something deep inside me had already decided that blood alone could never define a family. Love is built through sacrifice, patience, and showing up every single day. And before those children were even born, I had already promised myself they would never feel abandoned again. 5 months later, we stood together in a quiet courthouse with only two close friends beside us. And as Victoria rested one hand on her growing stomach, I promised to love her children as though they had always belonged in my arms. That promise was never spoken out of obligation, because it came from a place inside me that had already accepted them as my own. When the twins finally arrived, I held each tiny baby before anyone else could, and hearing their first cries filled my heart with a joy that words could never fully describe. We named them Ethan and Mason, and from that very first night I forgot every difference between biology and fatherhood, because those little boys instantly became the center of my entire world. For years our life was beautifully ordinary, filled with scraped knees, birthday parties, fishing trips, bedtime stories, and family dinners around an old wooden table that never seemed big enough for all the laughter we shared. Looking back now, I realize those simple memories became the greatest treasure of my life, because I never imagined the people I loved most would one day believe I had willingly walked away from them. Years slipped by faster than I ever expected, and every milestone reminded me how lucky I was to watch Ethan and Mason grow into kind, curious young men who filled our little home with energy and laughter. I never missed a school event, a baseball game, or a late-night homework session, because being present mattered more to me than earning extra money or chasing a bigger life. When Ethan was 8 years old, he crashed his bicycle while racing down a neighborhood hill and broke his wrist. And he squeezed my hand so tightly in the emergency room that my fingers went numb before the doctor even arrived. Mason was completely different because he preferred books over sports, and every Friday evening we would sit together on the back porch while he read adventure stories aloud until the sun disappeared behind the trees. Victoria often told her friends that I was the best father anyone could ask for, and hearing those words made every sacrifice feel worthwhile, because I believed we were building a future that would last forever. We never had expensive vacations or luxury cars, but our home was filled with laughter, respect, and the quiet happiness that comes from knowing everyone around the dinner table truly belongs together. Everything began changing after Victoria accepted a management position at a large marketing company in downtown Nashville. where she started spending long hours surrounded by successful people who lived very different lives from ours. She slowly became interested in expensive restaurants, designer clothes, and social circles where my stained work boots and small repair shop suddenly seemed embarrassing instead of honorable. At first I blamed the extra workload for the distance growing between us, believing the stress would eventually fade and everything would return to normal once life settled down again. Instead, the conversations became shorter, the smiles disappeared, and the woman who once appreciated our simple life started looking at me as though I represented everything she wanted to leave behind. One evening she quietly announced that she wanted a divorce, and although the words shattered my heart, I promised her we could separate peacefully if it means protecting Ethan and Mason from unnecessary pain. I believed mature adults could end a marriage without destroying a family, but I had no idea she had already planned something far more devastating than divorce. Victoria knew one secret that had remained hidden since before our wedding day, and she understood how fiercely I wanted to protect the boys from learning the painful truth about their biological father. She realized I would sacrifice almost anything to spare them that emotional burden, and she decided to use my greatest strength against me. Her attorney demanded full custody almost immediately, and during one private meeting Victoria calmly reminded me that a courtroom battle could expose everything we had hidden for 16 years. She never raised her voice or threatened me directly, but her meaning was unmistakable because she knew I would never risk turning my son's entire world upside down. After several sleepless nights I signed the custody agreement with tears burning behind my eyes, convincing myself that losing time with my boys was still better than forcing them to question their identities. Walking out of that courthouse felt like burying a part of myself while I was still alive, yet I believed I was making the only choice that truly protected them. A few weeks later my phone vibrated with a message that changed my life forever, and every word felt like another knife sinking deeper into a wound that had barely begun to heal. The message claimed Ethan and Mason no longer wanted me in their lives because they believed I had embarrassed them for years. And as I sat alone inside my truck I honestly wondered whether everything I had spent 16 years building had disappeared with a single lie. 3 long years passed without a single conversation between me and the 2 boys I still called my sons every time I thought about them. And every birthday, holiday, and family celebration became another painful reminder that the greatest part of my life existed only in memories. I wrote dozens of letters that I never mailed because I convinced myself they would only reopen wounds or make them believe I was refusing to respect the choice they supposedly made. Every morning I unlocked my repair shop before sunrise and buried myself in work until my hands were sore enough to distract me from the emptiness waiting at home. But even the loud sound of engines could not silence the questions running through my mind. I constantly wondered whether Ethan and Mason ever thought about me, or if the years we spent laughing, learning, and growing together had been erased by whatever story they had been told. One chilly afternoon I stopped at a grocery store after work, and as I walked toward the parking lot I saw Mason standing near the entrance with a backpack slung over one shoulder and a group of classmates laughing beside him. He looked taller than I remembered and almost grown into a young man, and for one hopeful second our eyes met before he quickly turned away without acknowledging that he had even seen me. I stood frozen beside my truck with my hand halfway raised in an unfinished wave, feeling as though every ounce of strength had drained from my body in a single moment. I drove home believing that his silence confirmed everything Victoria had claimed, never realizing that a confused teenager can hide heartbreak behind the same quiet expression adults often mistake for rejection. Later I would discover that my sons had been told I abandoned them because I wanted a different life without the responsibility of raising 2 teenagers, and they believed every missed birthday and unanswered phone call proved that cruel story. They had no idea I spent every holiday staring at old family photographs, wishing I could somehow explain that I never stopped choosing them for even one day. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number while I was replacing the transmission in an old pickup truck. And I almost ignored it because telemarketers called my shop several times each week. Something inside me insisted I answer anyway, and that single decision changed every remaining chapter of my life. The voice on the other end belonged to Victoria's younger sister Lauren, who had always treated me with kindness even after the divorce divided the family into opposing sides. She struggled to hold back tears before quietly telling me that Ethan had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of leukemia nearly a year earlier, and my knees became so weak I had to sit on the concrete floor just to keep from collapsing. Lauren explained that months of treatment had briefly forced the disease into remission before it returned stronger than before, leaving the doctors with only one realistic chance to save his life through a stem cell transplant. They had already tested Mason along with thousands of volunteer donors across the national registry, but every result ended with another heartbreaking disappointment while precious time continued slipping away. Without allowing Lauren to finish explaining the medical details, I grabbed my truck keys and told her I was already on my way to the hospital because nothing else mattered anymore. I did not stop to think about the divorce, the years of silence, or whether anyone there wanted to see me, because the only thought inside my mind was that my son needed help and I would do everything within my power to give it. As I raced toward the hospital, one difficult truth stayed in the back of my mind, quietly reminding me that my blood could reveal a secret I had protected for more than 16 years with every sacrifice I had ever made. Even knowing the truth might destroy the carefully constructed lies surrounding our family forever, I never considered turning around because a real father does not measure the cost of saving his child when that child's life hangs in the balance. The moment I stepped through the hospital entrance, the smell of disinfectant and the sound of distant monitors pulled me into a world where every second mattered, and I realized nothing else in my life compared to the fear of possibly losing my son. Before I could even ask for directions, I spotted Victoria standing outside the oncology unit, and the color drained from her face the instant she recognized me walking toward her. She hurried across the hallway with panic written all over her expression, lowering her voice so no one nearby could hear the conversation she desperately wanted to keep private. She insisted that I should leave before anyone asked unnecessary questions, but I calmly answered that I had not come to reopen old arguments because I had only come to help Ethan survive. For a few long seconds neither of us spoke, and the silence between us carried years of guilt, regret, and painful memories that words could never fully explain. I quietly reminded her that no secret was more valuable than our son's life, and she lowered her eyes because deep inside she knew I was willing to sacrifice everything while she was still trying to protect the past. A nurse soon escorted me into the transplant department where a specialist carefully explained every step of the compatibility testing process, making sure I understood that the results could take some time to analyze. I signed every consent form without reading more than a few lines because I had already made my decision before I ever walked through the hospital doors. As the nurse collected several tubes of blood, I found myself staring through the window toward Ethan's hospital room, wishing I could tell him how much I had missed him during the years we spent apart. Even if he rejected me after all of this was over, I knew I would still leave that hospital grateful simply because I had been given one more chance to stand beside him when he needed me most. Nearly an hour later, a senior oncologist named Dr. Harper entered the consultation room carrying my laboratory report, and her confident expression slowly disappeared as she studied the page in front of her. She quietly excused herself without offering an explanation, and through the glass window I watched her speak urgently with another physician before asking the laboratory to repeat every test from the beginning. A second blood sample was taken, and everyone treated the situation with unusual seriousness that I could not understand, leaving me wondering whether they had discovered a medical condition I never knew I had. When the repeated results arrived, Dr. Harper remained completely silent for several moments before requesting a private meeting away from the waiting area and the rest of the patients. Inside a small conference room, she gently explained that the laboratory findings were highly unusual, and she wanted to confirm a few details about my family history before saying anything further. She asked whether I was absolutely certain that Ethan was my biological son, and although the question caught me off guard, I calmly nodded because I already understood why the results had confused her. I took a slow breath before looking directly into her eyes, and I quietly admitted that I had always known Ethan and Mason were born before I entered their mother's life because I chose to become their father despite having no biological connection to either child. The room fell completely silent as the meaning of my words settled over everyone present. and every doctor suddenly realized the laboratory had not uncovered a medical mystery but a family secret carried in silence for nearly 2 decades. Only a few moments later, the hospital ethics team and several physicians gathered to discuss the unexpected discovery, while Victoria stood frozen outside the conference room, realizing that the truth she had hidden for years could no longer be controlled or denied. She understood that no explanation could erase the sacrifice I had willingly made that day, because while everyone else focused on bloodlines, my only concern had always been saving the young man I had loved as my own son from the very beginning. The following morning, Dr. Harper invited me back into the conference room, where several specialists had gathered after carefully reviewing every laboratory report and confirming the results more than once. Their expressions were serious but respectful, and one physician quietly admitted that everyone had initially believed there had been a mistake because the findings did not match the family information listed in Ethan's medical records. Victoria finally walked into the room with tears filling her eyes, and for the first time since our marriage ended, she looked completely defeated instead of defensive. She knew there was nowhere left to hide because medical science had exposed the truth more clearly than any courtroom argument or family dispute ever could. Dr. Harper gently explained that my tissue typing confirmed beyond any reasonable doubt that I could not be Ethan's biological father, yet she also made something equally important very clear to everyone present. She said that the willingness I had shown to come forward without hesitation demonstrated a level of parental devotion that many biological parents never managed to reach in a lifetime. The room remained silent until one member of the ethics committee softly asked why I had never told anyone the truth if I had known it from the very beginning. I looked around the table before answering with the 6 quiet words that changed everything, because they carried more weight than years of accusations ever had. A father's more than blood. Those 6 simple words settled over the room with incredible force, and nobody spoke because every person present understood that my actions had already proven them long before I ever said them aloud. I had protected 2 little boys from painful questions, accepted years of heartbreak without exposing their mother's secret, and willingly risked losing my own reputation just for the smallest chance to save one of their lives. Victoria finally broke down crying as she admitted that after our divorce she had lied to Ethan and Mason, telling them I had abandoned them because she believed it would make starting a new life easier. She confessed that she convinced the boys I no longer wanted them, never imagining the day would come when the truth would be revealed inside a hospital instead of a courtroom. A nurse quietly entered the room a few minutes later with unexpected news from the National Donor Registry, explaining that a newly registered volunteer had just been identified as a highly compatible stem cell donor for Ethan. Every person in the room immediately shifted their attention from the painful family revelations to the possibility that the transplant could finally move forward before the disease returned. Later that afternoon, I was allowed to visit Ethan for the first time in years, and when I stepped into his hospital room, he looked at me with uncertainty before tears slowly filled his eyes. He struggled to apologize for believing the lies he had been told, but I gently stopped him and wrapped my arms around him because no apology could ever matter more than having my son back in my life. Mason joined us later that evening, and the 3 of us spent hours talking about everything we had lost during those painful years while promising never to let silence or deception separate us again. It did not erase the past, but it gave us something even more valuable, which was the opportunity to rebuild our family one honest conversation at a time. Several months later, Ethan's transplant was declared successful. His strength slowly returned, and our family discovered that forgiveness can heal wounds that seem impossible to overcome when people choose truth over pride. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.